welcome. This is our sixth episode in the Decoded series. Today we're covering Vizlib Finance and how you can gain enhanced reporting through Qlik. Before we begin, a few items of housekeeping. Number one, the session is recorded, so don't worry about if you missed a section or you want to come back or you want to share with your team. The whole thing's recorded, and we'll send out the recording along with all of the resources that Michael will cover shortly and all of his tips as well, and we'll send that out following the end of the session. With Q&A, please do add all your questions rather than in chat, although you can add them in chat, but preferences in the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar. That way we have them itemized, we can get to them in order, and we can ensure we get to them correctly, whereas if we're scrolling through chat, we might miss a couple of things. So get your questions in there, and we will answer Q&A towards the end of the session. And I think that's it from me so far. So without further ado and without any more waffle, I will hand you over to Michael, the man, the reason we are all here today. Michael, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the intro. And as this is a snackable, it's going to be a quick one. As always, we aim for the 15 minutes. We usually end up with answering questions a little bit beyond that, but we aim to keep it short, simple, and please do keep those questions coming because that's what makes it interactive and a lot more fun for both you and us. So let's hope that really happens. So yeah, it looks like we have enough people on, so let's get started. The agenda for today is really quick and easy as well. So we have first a quick background on finance, then I'm going to talk about the features and the implementation, how to do it, and then I'm going to open up for questions. So short and sweet. When it comes to the background of why we have the financial report, the reasoning behind this was two things that we needed to do to get the finance department engaged with what we usually call BI, but analyzing data and analytics. One thing was to make sure that it was really easy to implement, and the other bit was the visual aspect of it, which we needed the finance report to look like a financial report and feel like a financial report. It couldn't just be a pivot table because it just didn't fit what the finance department was looking for. So those two are the things that we aim to solve with the finance report in Qlik. And with that, I'm not going to do any more PowerPointing. I'm going to jump straight into a demo instead. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the features and functions of the finance report. So if you look at this table, the visual things that are obvious here is that we have different types of designs for different rows. We have the normal expansion possible, but when we do that, we don't expand necessarily all the different rows. So for example, these subtotals, they're not expandable. And this is a typical type of feature that might seem small, but it's actually one of the key things when you start implementing this for the users to have in there. Yes.
Are you sharing your screen?
I should be. I was. Did you stop me from sharing my screen? Oh, you did.
No, definitely wasn't me. Oh, did I?
It was you. When you started the meeting, it stopped. Okay. All right, good.
There we go.
There we go. I assume everyone didn't need the screen for the first agenda bit. So it's all good, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So when we expand and we have these subtotals, we typically don't want them to be expandable. So that little plus sign is missing here. And that's one of the things that makes this look like a financial report. As you saw, that sort of the expansion of the different rows, we can put any dimensions below here that we want, a total of 5 different dimensions, and of course, including a top dimension if we want to. These are interchangeable, so if you want to change to a different dimension, we now have the transactional link at the very bottom here, but if we change that to account, then we can actually drill down the whole level and down to the account level and look at that in the report. So still interactive, not as interactive as the pivot table. So if you're looking at the pivot table and considering using that, it's also a really good use case. So when you have want to drag, drop different columns and things, and when you do that, that's probably something that the pivot table does better. So choose your extension for what you do. The other aspect then, so these are the most simple sort of visual aspect. We're going to go through a couple more of those, and then we're going to jump into sort of the more interesting bits of why this is important, and why these features are important, and what makes them unique. So a bit of visual stuff in here. Obviously, with our background, we want to make some things a bit more visual as well. So the data bar, including an indicator, those simple things that allows you to make it a bit more visual are of course in there. And looking at this one, you will see that there is no top dimension, but instead we're doing groups of measures. So we recognize that sometimes you need to have 20 measures in here, and then it actually makes good sense to group them in different groups to make sure that the table is still readable. So those are things that you can do in the table that you couldn't do in a normal pivot table. Also, in a very important aspect, and I'm going to show this one pretty early on, since I know that this is going to be asked otherwise, and that's the exporting of data. So when you export data in the finance report to Excel, it gets exported in a proper Excel format. So you don't just get a CSV export, you get the proper numbers with all the decimals in the right format, and even things like data bars. Note how this is not even an image or anything weird like that. This is actually the functionality of data bars in Excel that it exports this as. And obviously you can have different types of formatting, both on different columns, but also on different rows. So if one row has a different format like this one, then that's also reflected in the export. So it keeps a really nice export. And that's something that you just can't do with anything else. And then obviously also visual things when it comes to background colors, striped rows. I'm not going to linger too long on these, but also things like having one level expanded when you open it up. So already when you open it, it is actually expanded to the first level, because sometimes that just makes a lot of sense to have it like that. When we look at the report and the things in it, and I'm going to jump back to perhaps one of the other examples here. So when we look at the report and the different settings, and now we start connecting this to how we make it easy to implement it. But we're first going to look at how we do this. So when we look at the different styles for the different rows, if you were doing this in a normal pivot table or even in the Qlik native pivot table, where you don't have a huge amount of options, but you obviously have some, then you would have to calculate perhaps per row and check. If you wanted a different format, you'd have to do a big if statement. What we do instead is make sure that you have a type of row. And then those types of rows, or row styles as we call them, are simply very simple to change. So if I now wanted to change all the rows that are like these calculations, then I go in, and let's say I wanted to change the background here to orange. Probably not a great color choice, admittedly, but I could. And now, as you see, all those rows are changed. So there is no extra development needed just to do simple formatting changes like that. Also, going a bit further into the details of how this works and going over more to how you can actually implement it, what we wanted to do was to make it really simple to implement. So regardless of where your data is coming from, you can use our template and very quickly get started. And there's two parts to that template. One part of the template is this Excel file, and the other part is in the Qlik Sense app. There is a script that follows sort of the logic of the Excel file. You don't have to use an Excel file. You can use something different. If you wanted to use a database instead, you could probably use 90% of our script anyway, but you would have to change how it connects. So when you implement it, you basically list the number of reports that you want in there. In this example, we have a P&L, we have a balance sheet, and we have a KPI report, because obviously you can also do other types of reports here. It doesn't have to be a P&L. So we define that, and then we define the P&L more in detail. So the different rows, so each row, and typically what accounts it connects to, and then perhaps it also connects to a cost center, or in this example, a customer group. So we can have two of those that we connect to typically the P&L transaction. So what you would be looking for is the general ledger table in your ERP system. And when you do that, you get the data out, and typically you have all the transactions, and then you can quite easily connect it. So all you do is fill this out. And one really interesting thing here is also that once you've filled this out, then you can actually have someone else manage this. So if you implement this more from a developer IT perspective, then you can hand this over to a finance person. This doesn't have to be handled by IT. This is just a simple Excel. So anyone could actually handle this, which usually means that the updating and the maintenance of this whole setup becomes so much easier and cheaper for the organization. So it's a really important part of it as well. A few things to note in this template when and if you start trying this out. So what you see here is the report row. This is like the most granular, most detailed level of your finance report. If you want groupings or sort of more of an overview of those rows, you don't want to include all the rows, then the next column, in this case called row group, gives you that sort of overview. And you can add as many as you want as long as it's a hierarchy. So anything that's on the detailed level then has to sort of aggregate up to a more grouped level. And then you can add as many as you want. If you then want a completely different setup of the P&L, so still a P&L, but a different setup, in my example, P&L 2, then you just create a copy of that sheet, change whatever you need to change, and you also then have to add that into to this one. So you'd add a different row here, you'd add a P&L 2, and then it would include that in the script run when it loads. So looking at the different rows, there's a few things. So prevent expand, this is the thing where don't add the plus sign, just a simple one or leaving it blank. The other part, the one that we were talking about, was around the different styles. So out here on the far right is the different style and the style number. You can have a little bit of a cheat here, and you can look at this one to see which one is which on the style. But then you can just add different styles for different rows. So again, very simple. So we have the style 3 here, and then you'll see that, that's the calculation that would then appear on all the calculation rows. And this means that even changing the styling for different rows or defining a row differently, that can actually also be done from someone else just managing this Excel file, or as I said, if you're implementing this in a SQL database instead, then you could do it right there. So this is the quick sort of introduction to how you use the finance report. All you need to do in the actual file is change these rows in the Excel file, and obviously in the Qlik Sense app, you have to change the script, but you don't have to change that much. So you actually just have to go to the first tab. You can actually look at the README if you forget what I'm saying now, and then here, read demo data, you need to change the connection. So you just change this connection to where you put the Excel file, and then that's it. So really simple to get started on your environment. And then you just replace sort of what we have here is transactions, demo transactions. You just replace these with the actual transactions coming from your database, and then you should be up and running very, very quickly with this. With that quick introduction, I think I'm almost done. 15 minutes already. Time flies when you're having fun. So I'm going to start sort of going through the questions a little bit and looking at what I can answer there and see how we can do this. Okay, so looking at the questions, I have a few here. So what makes it better than the built-in Qlik object? So I think I mentioned a few of the things. So one of the things is the maintainability of this solution compared to a Qlik table. The maintainability would be much worse. And then, of course, the visual features are different. And the non-expand, you couldn't do that in a Qlik pivot. You could obviously do a straight table in Qlik, but then you'd lose other types of functionality. The grouping of the measures also not there. So there's quite a few of those things that are different. I would say that the main thing that makes it valuable is that whole easy to get started and easy to maintain, which means that it's a huge cost saver. But then, of course, the obvious one that people wouldn't use it unless it actually looked like a financial report. So thank you for that one. I'll check that one off as answered live. The I'm having trouble getting the percentage calculations to work in my finance report for EBITDA. Can you please explain how the calculation and the calculation input columns and template work? Yeah, sure. So here is something where we've tried to make it a little bit simple. And sometimes perhaps that even makes it harder. I don't know. But let's take a look at the expressions and what we do with that. So in the template, in the Excel file, we actually have something called calculations, right? So let's have a look at this one. So here, and what the question is about is around these calculation input 1 and 2, and that this is an actual calculation. So the way that this is used in the expression is that if we look at the I think we have this as a master item. So oops, measure and actual, and we look at the measure. So this is what it will look like. I'm going to see how much I can improve the size of this as well, so make it a bit more readable. We do two different things. So and this is actually good that I get to show this because we only do two different calculations really. Also a blank row, but the blank row calculation is only a blank, so it's straightforward. The third one is the margin calculation, and what this does is now take the amount and then we divide it by the amount, but only where the row number is smaller than or equal to the calculation input 1. So we're actually taking a look at that calculation input and just using the rows above that. So the reason that we're doing this instead of doing a set expression, which might perform better, is just for simplicity, because it means that we're getting only one expression here, because then we can actually use the same expression again, but just changing the calculation input rather than changing the expression. Another way to go about this is that you could also create a set expression here, and then do different calculations. So now this was calculation 3. You see calculation 3 here. You could just keep adding more calculations if you wanted to, and then it would calculate in a different way. So you could add as many of these as you want. Bear in mind how you want performance here, and what's most effective depends on the data, depends on your calculations. So not always obvious which one is the better choice, but that hopefully gives you a bit of an idea of how that works. One really important thing is that everything that you're calculating needs to be available. So in the calculation, the default thing that we get is that everything above is included. So if you're doing a calculation on a different row, like if you have that calculation sitting on the first row, for example, then the data that you need to make that calculation is not yet available. Then what you can do is use row from override and row to override to say that actually everything in this calculation should come from, I don't know, these rows or something. And then you have from row 25 to 52, and you have that included. Because what the logic is in the script is that we're getting the calculations, so we're getting the data connected in the data model to make sure that everything that you need for this calculation is also connected to the row calculation. Then we might not be using all of that, but if we've done it in a good way, we'll be using quite a bit of it. So important thing here, make sure that everything that you need is connected. So if you're unsure of why the calculation is not working, break it out into a different table, look at what is actually related to this row. Select that row in the data model, look at the data that you have connected, make sure that all the numbers there that you need are there that you need for the calculation. Yeah, bit of a long one on that. Sorry about that, but it is a little bit complicated. Obviously, you need quite a bit of Qlik understanding here, and it's not always going to be like super straightforward, even though we try to make it as simple as possible. So I'm going to answer live on that one. That one done. So hi, what is column multiple and how can it be used? So the multiple column, the question is about this one in where do we have it? It's here somewhere. I know there's a column. Yeah, here. So multiple. Usually the use case for this is when we want to flip the signs. So typically when you want costs to be positive, because sometimes when you do a P&L, you want the costs to be positive, then you can just do a -1 in here and it will flip the row. So that's what it's for. Can you explain the extra mapping intervals in the Excel sheet? Yeah, so the extra mapping intervals, I assume we mean this one then probably. So the actual one more way to do it. So in this case, we've done it by customer group, and this means that we can map on that as well. So he's actually doing two setups of joins in here, or actual interval matches. You can only have two, but you can use both of those. And then what you do is you actually add them here, row group, and then they go. Oh, sorry, no, not there. Here, and then once you've added it here, then it will read that column as well, and it will include it in the interval matching to get the rows connected to the correct data. So add it in options, and then in your report, have it here. Did we have a few more questions, Jason? I think there's.
Yes.
Did you get some in the chat as well? Yep.
Yes, we have a couple from the community, which I'll go through now. I've pieced together over the last couple of days. Number one, how long does it take to implement P&L profit and loss?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of that how long is a piece of string type question. So it depends obviously on your system, but typically getting a prototype up of this, getting that running, assuming you kind of at least know what you're getting the data from, you know where your general ledger is in your system, it shouldn't take you more than a day or two to get something up and running that's going to be good enough for a prototype. Then you're probably going to spend quite a few days making sure that all those intervals are correct, that the data is actually there exactly how you want it. So you're probably going to spend to implement it properly, but more like 10, 15 days. But a lot of that is just going to be checking. So it shouldn't be more than a couple of days to get the first sort of solution up and running.
Cool. Thank you very much. Next question from the community is, do you have a template specific to SAP? Good old question, that one.
No, we don't. We don't have templates for any specific ERP systems. If there's any partners on the call, this is a great opportunity. If you know an ERP system really well, take our template, connect it to an ERP system, just build your own version of it. This template hasn't really changed for a long time, so it should probably be the same even in the future. Just take it, build it towards the ERP system, and you'll have something that you can present to your customers. If you're a customer, I'm sorry, we don't do that because it's just quite a bit of work. And I'm getting some tips here in the Q&A, I see. I have lots for Sage. So at least one of you has it for Sage. Great, amazing.
Love that.
So, see, there is a lot in the Qlik community and overall. So also I would say ask in the Qlik community. Yeah. People are super helpful.
Cool. And then the last one from me, does Finance Report work on Qlik Cloud?
Yes, it does. There is really no big difference in using this in Qlik Cloud. And that actually reminds me that I think we missed a couple of things. So when it comes to cloud, and for that matter, in general, using Finance Report with a server component. So if we add a server component to the Finance Report, we actually get two more functions or features. One is the commentary feature. So if, as you see, it now says connected to server down here, this means that we can do commentary inside the Finance Report. So if you add the Vizlib server, which is included with Finance Report, then you can also add comments for individual cells, making sure that you can sort of follow up on your whole process. The other thing that you get is actually scheduled reports. So you can schedule Excel exports of your Finance Report, just like that perfect export that I showed you earlier, but exported and sent through email or Slack. And then you can just make that happen every morning. And of course, you can filter it to make sure that it only sends out for example, one of the countries or something. So with the server, two things that you can do, comments and that. So yeah. Yeah, okay.
Awesome. I think, let me just double check my notes. Yep, that's it from what we gleaned from the community. And yeah, Adrian adding again, just saying it should be no harder to use based on SFP either once you know what you're doing. I think that's the critical point. Once you know what you're doing.
It's that little thing. Once you know what you're doing, yeah, that's that. Since one thing here, all my things disconnected here, but one thing that's really cool is that if you start doing finance and you connect it to writeback, then you could do even more advanced things. So now let's say that we actually wanted to start adjusting data, then we could even do that. So this way we could actually not just have the data as it is, but we could also start adjusting the forecast, adjusting the budgets or whatever it is that you're doing, and do all of that inside Qlik. So adding writeback to this makes it like really, really powerful. Not sure why we're waiting so long for the data model to refresh. It should be faster. Go, done. So if you were following really closely now, you would have seen the numbers change in consultation fee. The forecast, because I updated the amount. And a few other things that you can do with the forecasting and the writebacks is that perhaps do a different setup with that, but I actually want to show you this one because this one's cooler. So you could build workflows as well. So if my role now is normal user, maybe I could go through this and say that, hey, this was actually, yeah, this is an info, this was high, due to strike. I don't know. Very unlikely, wasn't it? But anyway, and as you can see, really cool thing here, I'm locking this row, and this is because I'm using it, so no one else can write on this row as I'm using it, meaning that we can also do this with multiple users at the same time. If I were now to change my role to management here, I would be able to do the approved and rejected and do a management comment, and I can also follow and see all the comments that's made before, for example, by doing a pop-up like this. So adding writeback to it brings the next level, which we're not really covering in this webinar, but just to give you a small taste of that as well.
Although we are covering that in a webinar coming up, so stay tuned for that. Nice. Yeah, I think that's it. Some great comments coming in, but no more questions and some advice. But yeah, thank you very much. As we mentioned at the beginning of the call, we recorded the whole session, so never fear if you missed out a part of it or you want to share it or you want to go back to it. We will send out a recording plus any links and resources that Michael shared. We'll share that at the end of this. And thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you, Michael, for presenting. And we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Ciao, ciao.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.